The views and opinions expressed in the following podcast do not necessarily reflect those of the producers, the affiliates, or digital platforms hosting this podcast. All content is for the purposes of education, conjecture, and at times entertainment. We promote inclusiveness and diversity. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Into the Deep with Jay Costa.
Welcome to Into the Deep. I'm Jay Costa. I am delighted about today's guest. They are a poet, a photographer, an author, and happens to be a mermaid. Today's guest is Swann. Elyrria, Elle, teaches humans how to make contact with beings from the elemental kingdoms and the extraterrestrials who they feel will be engaging in open contact with all of us in the near future. We talk about so much in this episode. We talk about astral and incarnated mermaids, which is what Elle is. We talk about moral aptitude and how it relates to our spiritual gifts. We also talk about the use of inclusive language, as well as being gender neutral when describing elemental energy. So, join me as we seek light and journey into the deep with Swann. Enjoy. Elle, thank you so much for joining me here on Into the Deep. I can't thank you enough.
Absolutely. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. So if you could, for those that are listening and those that are watching, could you share with those who you are and what it is you do, my friend?
Of course. So my name is Elle, and I actually live in Sedona, Arizona, which is like a big spiritual hotspot. So I think that'll appeal to a lot of people. And as pertains to our conversation tonight, I study astral and incarnated mermaids. That's the concise answer.
Right. The abridged version, right?
The very abridged version. If we get into the human side, it gets even more expansive.
Right on. That's awesome. Well, so I guess we could start with even just talking about it. We're talking about incarnate, right? We're talking about incarnate mermaid, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, incarnated mermaids. So those would be mermaids who come into a human body, walk the earth in human form for a specific lifetime, or sometimes for a series of lifetimes. And I happen to be one of those people.
Awesome. And when did you come to this discovery, and how?
It was a process, honestly. So I first made contact with mermaids, or they first made contact with me when I was a kid. And I guess you could call it channeling in a way. I wasn't speaking their words to other people, but I was receiving them myself and having kind of this inner dialogue with them. So it started off that way. It kind of went through my teenage years, and I wasn't certain what it all meant or what the full implications were, even though they communicated that it would be a lifelong, meaningful exploration and, ongoing dialogue. But I think that the big thing that really helped me understand how big and how important it was just contacting the spiritual community. And I met my friend, his name is William Mistely. He wrote the foreword for my book on mermaids, and he's really good at reading auras and identifying people with elemental iterations to their energy. And he was able to identify that I have a very strong watery energy. And we got to that conversation because I have a lot in common with other people with that type of aura. He studied them for decades. So he was just like, oh yeah, this is what a mermaid is. A mermaid is someone with water in their aura or their energy field, and you have it. So that would explain a lot about the way you are. So that was again, abridged awakening process there.
Nice. Did you ever feel a connection to the water yeah, okay.
Absolutely. It's funny though. I was saying it's actually on a different podcast. I'm not a particularly strong swimmer. I almost drowned in the wave tank at Water Country USA when I was a kid. So that's the funny side of it. But yes, I always had a very deep connection to the water element. It's one of those things where I think a lot of humans have that connection, of course, too. We're born of water. We are surrounded by water in in utero. And it's something that I think makes a lot of us feel safe and secure and brings us back to that awesome space. But with mermaids, it goes a step further where we truly feel that water is a part of our being. So it's not like we have to go seek it out for us to feel at one with it. But the cool thing is, we're not better than anyone else because I can teach everyone to make water a part of themselves. And that's all that a mermaid is. It's just someone who's made water a part of who they are.
Right on. And it's an interesting thing to talk about too. Now we're talking about elements, and there may be some listeners that might not understand elemental aspects of things, right? And or even the association with maybe even astrological aspects of it too. Would you care to elaborate on some of that too for some of our listeners who might not necessarily know what that's about?
Yeah, so a really quick introduction to elementals. They're basically spirits that inhabit the astral plane. And the astral plane is just like a big spiritual realm. It's kind of parallel to our earth realm, but we can't see it because it exists on a higher vibration. So elementals will be like gnomes for the earth element, salamanders for fire, sylphs for air, and mermaids for water. And then, of course, we have other spheres of spirits. I mean, they're really innumerable if you really get into all the esoteric spiritualism. We got star seeds and ETs and just all this crazy stuff. But elementals are fundamentally spirits of nature. So if nature were to embody itself and speak, it would be an elemental in one of those ways.
Mm. And yet you were able to, well, at least with the help of William, discern that you had more of that elemental sign of water.
He was really good at identifying that in my aura because prior to that, of course, I would have said I feel at one with water. That kind of clued him in, at first. And I've had a lot of things happen, like watery auras are very magnetic, so we tend to draw people in. So there's a joke that every mermaid has like 50 different stalkers. No matter what they may look like physically, they pull people in some way. So that was kind of another clue in, because I was telling him about those challenges I'd faced, and he was kind of helping me do meditations to sort of like disguise the aura, which is actually really hard for me, but I've worked on it. But yes, he was the one who identified what it was, even though I could already vocalize at least my connection to the element itself and discern that I was speaking to some form of elemental before that. And that was probably, I think it was in 2011, 2012 when I first met him. So I was still living in Virginia at that time. So yeah.
Right on. And so I guess that would, segue into communicating with that realm. So, it sounds like it's on a vibrational aspect of things, frequency, so to speak, where if you're talking about a parallel world that's running alongside ours, do you find that there are certain times that you're able to communicate or receive messages maybe stronger than other times?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I do always feel at one with the element itself. However, you are right. I am in a human body, so there are times when it is a little bit harder. So if I'm sick, or sometimes I've noticed this with extraterrestrials too, because I work with them. They'll kind of pull back a little bit if I'm focusing on a human project. So when I was in school or finishing a degree or doing something like that, they would still be there if I wanted to contact them, but they wouldn't come through as much without it being really clear what's happening, so they don't interrupt my human life. So during those times, yes, it would be a little bit harder, but it's because I'm directing my focus elsewhere. So
Hmm.
yeah.
So I have to ask, with everything going on, maybe even just in the world as a whole, even social media to just regular news, is there anything right now currently that like you're experiencing that might be different than what you maybe experienced earlier on?
With the mermaids specifically.
Yes, if
Yeah.
or any, even with extraterrestrials or anything.
Yes, it's been pretty interesting to see all these different, energies converge. Of course, we do have a lot happening in the world, as you said. The mermaids exist on their plane no matter what's going on in the earth realm or, whatever else. So they can have their own experiences and not have our I wouldn't say bad energies, just, lower vibrational energies, just as
Sure.
humans. It's not going to contaminate or inform their realm as much as we think it might. However, I do have many mermaids that I work with to mitigate some of the challenges and the, dual seemingly conflicting energies that we have on this plane. So they do show up much more readily when I meditate on those things, or when I focus on a group of people's energy, their auras, or perhaps a world leader. That is a lot harder for me because um, water isn't an element that naturally seeks to solve things. It's naturally healing, but we have to learn how to direct our focus. That's more of like a fire or earthy feeling. But because William has that strength and we meditate together, or at least on the same thing simultaneously, he can kind of bring that motivation to the forefront and be like, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to do it. And then I just show up with that energy. Outside of mermaiding in my human life, I am actually really good at directing energy because I have to. I've been in the academic world for a long time, and you're not going to be very successful if you can't do that. But in the spiritual realm, it's much more natural for me to kind of lean back and just be. So it helps to have someone there to, kind of refine the process.
Right on. Obviously great to kind of have some, I guess, guardrails, so to speak, kind of keep us, on a trajectory. So,
Mhm.
um, do you feel like in what you're able to experience, it's altered your, I guess, your world and your life? Do you feel like it's had a positive impact on you?
Oh, definitely. It's something that is intertwined with who you are in the core of your being when you make an element a part of yourself. So the water specifically greatly increases your capacity for empathy. And I tell people that even though that's really good, there could be, more negative connotations to it, because empathy by itself is just feeling what another person feels. And I think that we all know we have a lot of dark empaths in this world, and people who will wield or weaponize that ability
Hmm.
to, satisfy their own desires and needs. So what I say is, just because you may have a spiritual gift or because you've cultivated one doesn't mean that it positively correlates with moral aptitude. So you have to really think about that and why you're cultivating what you're cultivating. But the water element itself does lend you some of that empathy. And when you can couple it with that compassion and that warmth, and perhaps a little bit of that directed focus, it can be incredibly potent and meaningful for healing so many world problems today.
Hmm. I love that. Have you been able to have that positive impact maybe on those close to you, because of this?
Yes, I get so many messages every week. This is a really specific way that I use the water element. I think all water people or mermaids are excellent at healing in some way. So you can use a specific human modality if you want, like Reiki or breath work or whatever. Those are vehicles that you can use. But the energy itself is always present with the mermaids, and I think it's pretty intuitive for most of us to be able to send that to others. There are certain challenges. They're fun. They're kind of like mysteries to solve. But I know one of the mermaids, she's so talented. But when she heals someone, she more takes care of their symptoms instead of the underlying problem. But we have another person who's really good with the underlying problem. So if you work together, kind of like I call them mermaid pods, if you work together in a pod, you can really get to the bottom of the issue. So I get a ton of messages, every week. Hey, can you help me heal this person? Hey, can you send energy to this person? And I do my best to get to as many people as possible. So that's the most grounded form of what I do that I think most people will understand and relate to.
Nice. And is that stuff that you discuss in your book?
A little bit. I don't go as far into the healing side. I'm actually thinking about starting a second mermaid book and getting more into that and going more into depth about the different meditation techniques and
Mm.
channeling techniques that I use. But my book itself, it's laying the foundation. And when I was writing it, the two things the mermaids were communicating to me was, number one, be inclusive, make sure that uh, everything you do can be understood by as many people as possible and integrated by as many as possible. So that was the big one. And then the second one was don't overcomplicate things, just lay the foundation, make sure people understand what it means to be a mermaid and to cultivate that energy field and interact with that realm, make sure they're comfortable with it. And then later on, we'll go into greater depth. And I do have actually a mermaid blog on the SedonaMermaid.com. So I do talk about a lot of human issues sometimes, problems in Sedona, things like that. But I just recently posted a blog called Calling Cards for Mermaids that people can use to help connect to mermaids more deeply after they've read the book and they kind of want to take that next step.
That's great. What led you to that point, that precipice to say, I need to write a book? What was that?
I love that question. I have this process with writing where I can't plan it, even if I want to. Like if it's a school project or something, I'm writing, a dissertation, you have to delegate your time. But when it comes to spiritual things or just like even geeky interests, stuff like that, it's just like it forms itself inside of me and I'm not fully conscious of it. And then it just sort of comes to this head and it's like all this pressure. And then I just sit down one night and I don't even know that I'm about to write. And then I just start writing and I just get it all out. I just info dump it onto, a Word document page. So that's kind of my process. But I always knew that I wanted to write the book that I couldn't find on the shelves when I was younger. So that was up there in the consciousness. But when I sat down the night that I did to write the mermaid book, did I know that it would turn into all of this? No, I didn't. I wrote it down and I was originally just going to make it a really big PDF. So
Right.
it was pretty interesting to see that, culminate as it did. But I just kind of go with the flow and channel what intuitively comes to me. And it worked out this time. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah, that's awesome. And was it like a series of sessions, so to speak, of sitting down and like having to really like think about it? Or like you said, was it like just like a all one?
The second one.
Right.
I did add a final chapter. And of course, you go through the whole editing process that takes months
Sure.
and months and you have to refine what you said and, just fix small things. But I did add the final chapter because both William and my publisher thought that it would be more relevant if people could see what happens if we don't integrate elements and make sure that we're balanced in our water and not just in the other earth and fire and, the more outgoing rather than receiving energies. So because they told me that I added something, but really most of it was, shot and in the can by the time I sent it to the publisher. So yeah, it was pretty, it flowed.
That's great. And I mean, you don't have to answer this. But was there much editing to really do?
In regard to one thing, yes, I realized that as I was writing it, my language wasn't as inclusive as it needed to be.
Oh,
And I think it's because, I grew up in a really conservative, puritanical type of environment, and I'm very far away from that now. But sometimes it still comes through in my language where I hypergender my speech, which I do not want to be doing. I'm actually non-binary myself. So I just had to go back and think, hold on, is this clear that anyone can do this regardless of their gender and that energy isn't really gendered, even though humans assign gender and meaning, because that's how we understand things.
Sure.
So I went back and I fixed that. That was the big thing. And other than that, it was just adding that final chapter, like here's what happens if we don't, and then just basic grammar and paragraph structuring. So
Right on.
it wasn't too bad.
Well, good. You bring up a great point because, we think about like the I guess not the challenges, that's a wrong word to use, but really using inclusive language when we're talking about like divine feminine energy, divine masculine energy, so in your opinion and your feelings, like what's the best way to navigate that when we're describing these kinds of energies?
It's so cool that you asked that. I actually just wrote a blog post addressing a big problem we have in Sedona about that. And it's a big blog that I did and it all interconnects. But my thing is, I think for me, it came down to a statement that kind of the new age likes to share, where it's, I don't know if Jordan Peterson came up with it or someone else, but it's like feminine is chaos, masculine is order. And I think that's incredibly harmful. I do understand that when you say feminine, it doesn't automatically mean woman. I understand that that could mean like the feminine in anyone, regardless of their identity. But I still think it's harmful because as you think about the way that we organize our lexicons and the way that we make speech so emblematic in our minds, we do come to associate like illogical or like that Victorian idea of female hysteria with those connotations.
Mm.
So for me, I try to use more gender neutral language, they them, or I just express that receiving energies are not automatically feminine, and masculine energies are not automatically outgoing, even though we think of it that way, because the fact is the masculine can also receive, the feminine can also give, and there's many ways physically but also emotionally and spiritually that can happen. So I think that we just need to stay open to the idea that our language does structure our thought process, but our thought processes or our brains also somewhat conform to the spheres that we engage with. So as we slowly dismantle those old structures and just come up with like upgraded speech, we're not erasing identities, we're not erasing any of those things. But as we add to them and perhaps realize that gender, based on everything I've studied so far and read, isn't ingrained. Identity is very fluid. It's in flux even throughout most people's lifetimes. I think that we can be much more permissive to other ways of being and speaking. So I know I just like info dumped there, but hopefully that all kind of makes sense altogether.
Absolutely. No, that's great. And I think you articulated it quite well too. When we think about it too, is, at an earlier time, we talk about whether it's even pre-puritanical ideal within the human psyche, trying to find that proverbial balance, I think, where that kind of shifted and kind of came from. And so now the conscious mind and the consciousness of humanity or just of beings is shifting upwards, and we're moving in a different direction. We're ascending in a lot of people's opinions. So I think these are the important kind of conversations that people could be having more frequently.
Absolutely. And it's just so synchronous that you brought that up, because it's been one of the biggest topics in all of my personal spheres lately, even in geek interests and things like that outside of spirituality. It's such a big topic. So it's one of those things where when you understand how fluid everything is and how, even the men who authored the Constitution said, this needs to be updated every 10 to 20 years so that we don't step into generational tyranny here. I think the same thing applies to spiritual practices and the way that we talk about ourselves and others. So it's one of those things where it can be an exciting and fun experience. It doesn't have to be, dismal and depressing. It's self-exploration, expanding, and being more open to all that we are.
I love that. And that, I think, is probably one of the most important key things of anyone on a spiritual path, because there aren't any two individuals that will see everything in this realm, in this dimension, in this life, the exact same way. It's impossible. Mm-hmm. And so to accept and to love, each other as who we are while we're still in a process of becoming, right? It's not this concrete rock. It's this, it's like a breath. It's becoming.
And like beautiful.
You said, it's that fluid. So in your opinion, your feelings, how are some ways we could maybe open some hearts and some minds to really embrace or start understanding what it is we're talking about right now?
With the gender, do you want me to relate it to mermaids as well?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So through the water element, through that lens, I'm thinking of it as a lens right now. You don't have to integrate the water element to the degree that I have. I've almost made it into like an entire spiritual path. Mm. It's something that I think people can do over time, and it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to consume your whole life. But through all of that, as far as opening minds and hearts, I guess it does depend on where the person is and what specifically we're talking about. But it's one of those things where I know some people don't like the word creation because it has certain dogmatic connotations, but
sure.
Just as we are creating, these moments in this life together, I think the best way to know ourselves is by exploring and giving ourselves the permission to go down all these different avenues, even if we, hit a brick wall or it's not quite the path for us. We only know ourselves by what we do and what we experience and how we are juxtaposed to things that are different from us, not even always just opposite, just slightly, varying degrees of different. So I think that that's one of the biggest inspirational talking points there is just, can we allow people to be who they are? Can we allow ourselves to become as much as we can be? And who knows what that is? Honestly, I think we all have some idea of what we want it to be, but how are we going to get there if we don't open ourselves up to these bigger concepts and get rid of some of the delineations that we don't need? What if we blurred the boundaries just a little bit and brought things more to an equal playing field, make it a little bit more equitable for everyone to fully explore all that they are? I feel like I was a little redundant there, but
No. It's sometimes it calls for redundancy in a conversation, right? To really drive a point home, or maybe even that feeling and that sense of the ideology that one is feeling within themselves. So no, I think it's part of the process, right?
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Integrating the water element itself can really help someone step into that space of allowance, I think, no matter how they come at it, whether, they do want to hold on to that feminine or masculine ideal, or whether they, they want to move on to something that works better for them. So I think that just the energy field itself, once you sit in that realm and you truly know what it feels like, you can bring it back with you to your human life. So that's incredibly helpful. I'm not really going into detail right now about how to do that. I'm just saying it's a really good thing to do if you want a good permission slip to start.
Would you want to discuss how one would go about that?
Absolutely. So to integrate into the mermaid realm and to start out with it first, I do have some steps in my book and they can go through that. But I start off with a basic meditation, and I was a little bit sneaky there because it's more of an advanced thing, but I like to teach people that they can imbue water with energy. But what that means is I think water can also imbue us with what we give it and what it already has as well. So I think that there's this conversational almost exchange between the two things when you interface with them. So I teach people how to basically almost program water with certain feelings or elevated levels of compassion, or perhaps even just intention, whatever that looks like, and then to direct it to others or to themselves or towards an issue. Because water, unlike fire, does take more time to do things. But as we know, we wouldn't have the Grand Canyon without that constant, water can be very erosive. People don't think about that configuration or that potential that it has to do that. Right. So I find that over time, practicing with these things, it's incredibly helpful to introduce someone to the mermaid realm that way, because it activates their own potential in the human world. But it also, over time, will open them up to water's potential to touch them as well. And that's in a spiritual sense mostly, but Who knows what it can do physically as well.
Right.
So that's a good start. Oh, you're totally fine. I don't want to overwhelm anyone. So I'll just say maybe the other thing to kind of think about is just get used to the water element. I have a whole meditation in my book about how to explore like the outer realm of the mermaid sphere. And the reason I introduce people to that, which I call kind of the playroom, is because I think that the mermaid realm can be a bit of a shock to some people. It's in no way dangerous, like maybe how some people are thinking. There aren't sirens or, a succubus waiting there to suck your soul out or anything. But it's one of those things where it completely transports you to a different vibrational space. And I think many of us understand that when we quickly escalate from, so many cycles per second vibrationally to that next tier, it can have certain effects on even our physical form. So the water element in the mermaid realm is really cold. And I don't think a lot of people are used to that, for one thing, just in a very physical sense. But on another, I love that we were talking about identity a little bit earlier, because it makes the concept of identity and self-anchored definitions a little bit more free floating. which is interesting. So it can be a little bit scary and unsettling sometimes to people at first. I've noticed that. So it's just, take your time, sit with it in the meditations when you go through those. You don't need to pressure yourself into it. It's just, take things one step at a time. And we all have challenges. Like I have a really hard time with the earth element because it's so dense. It makes me really nauseated actually to work with physically. So I have to take things slow. So that's another thing. But I think the big takeaway is that even if you don't want to meditate on the mermaid realm like that and put yourself in that position, you can still interact with it, because I think that whenever we're acting on our joy and we're creating art, or we're writing poetry, or we're singing, or we're making something really beautiful, we're in a channeling state. So even if you're like me with the water element, like as I am to the earth element, where you can't like completely connect with it for some reason, it's okay. You can still make contact with it. It can still flow through you, and you can integrate it as you will, after you put it on paper or into an art piece or whatever your heart so desires.
That's awesome. Do you feel like there are certain maybe mediums that you can go down or utilize that you're able to maybe communicate that energy or let that energy through better than others? I mean, you brought up like poetry. So is that, I guess, did I articulate that properly? I guess,
Oh, beautifully. Yes.
okay.
Yeah. So, you were listening wonderfully. So yes, poetry is a beautiful way to start. If someone is like, I don't know how I feel about channeling, or, maybe that's a little too esoteric for me, that's fine. Because the fact is, you can still make contact with all of those higher dimensions, or really anything that you want, and beam it through in another way that has less of a physical engagement, like on a visceral or neurological level that some of us might experience. Some of us are more sensitive to that type of thing. So I think that one of my favorite ways to interact with the mermaid realm at first is through poetry. And it doesn't have to rhyme. A lot of poetry these days doesn't rhyme anyways. So you're good. It doesn't have to be something that you're going to submit to a, poetry journal. It just has to come from your heart. And I think that the best poetry is often the poetry that surprises you, whatever that looks like. So just start free writing. If you don't like to write, there's so many other ways to go about it. You could paint a picture, you could dance, and just, kind of be like, okay, I want to channel the mermaid realm in this way. What would it look like if it moved? Like, what if we took it and we broke it down to its bare components, and we were a bit reductive here, but we still lived it and experienced it to the best that we are able.
Right
So
on.
I think those are good ways to start.
And that's great. And some of the individuals that you've met on this journey, maybe some people also in the community as well. Do you find that you're able to learn some new, either, I guess, techniques or ways of channeling from them, and vice versa?
Oh, definitely. And I just realized I didn't even give you the other big thing that I use to contact
Oh,
mermaids, and that's lucid dreaming. There you go, Elle. It
there we
takes
go.
up such a big part of my life, and I can't believe I didn't say it earlier. But I have a blog post up right now about lucid dreaming, and I'm going to put another one up soon about lucid dreaming techniques. So if you
Great.
want to get really technical and awesome, then I would go ahead and look into that. I'm going to put it all together, and I should have it up in the next couple of weeks. But lucid dreaming is an incredible way to make contact with your true inner self, to make contact with other beings. And I've even experimented with contacting other people in the physical, just in the dream world, like people I know in my human life. So that's a really cool thing to do. Um, I'm so sorry. Could you restate your question one more time? I
Oh
got kind
no,
of sidetracked with
no,
lucid
that's
dreaming.
okay. This is free flow. This is we're conduits. We're just this is
We're going for it here.
that's it. That's it. It's all conversational. So essentially, just like, maybe some other individuals that you've met, through the community that maybe you've
Mhm.
learned some new techniques from for like channeling, as well as like they learned from you. And have there been any things that have maybe really that just kind of like captivated you, or maybe just really not shook your world, but really like, wow, I never realized I could use this.
Yeah, for sure. So for my part, I would say that probably speaking, like I said, into the lucid dreaming
Mm,
world more, and that creative potential. It's not like I uncovered it, but
sure.
as each person experiences it, we find, new creative things and new possibilities and potentials. As for me specifically with channeling, probably the most useful thing that I've heard that I didn't originally think of was just it's okay to go off by yourself and to completely, I don't know, I don't want to say self isolate, but it's one of those things where you almost have to take a journey sometimes and go out by yourself to originally really get to know yourself and to understand what all of your varying degrees of need and interest and energetic fluctuations look like. Because once you understand that, I think that you can start to kind of pull down those barriers that we set up to kind of stay immersed in the human world. And we can, I mean, this isn't new information. It's just something that I always felt like I had to justify the idea that I'm incredibly introverted and very solitary naturally. But I found that integrating with other channels was incredibly nutritive for me and very validating, I guess I would say. So I think just really getting to know yourself and sometimes just taking those journeys off on your own and then coming back to community with the gifts that you have, that at least for me was incredibly helpful. I was kind of already doing it, but I felt like maybe I was doing something wrong at first, because we do highlight really big time on community and connection and all that stuff. But I think that we are the most beneficial to everyone when we have already nurtured ourselves and we know ourselves as well as we possibly can. So taking those journeys has been very helpful for me.
That's great. I can align with that. And why do you think it's so challenging for what seems like that process of knowing thyself for a lot of individuals to actually take that time to really be introspective and look at themselves and discover who they truly are? Why do you think that is?
I think as humans, at least in our physical vessels, we come to fear the unknown. Of course, we all know that saying. So it's like you're standing on the brink and it's like, I found that when you're exploring yourself, I have this image in my mind always. It's like, I don't want to think of it necessarily always as in darkness and light, but this is just what comes to mind. It's like the path is not illuminated until you step onto it. So it's like, as you take each step, you're actually creating an entire, I don't know, I'm thinking in geek terms, like an entire side quest. That's what your life is. You are actively creating in those moments. So you need to fully, I think we need to have the spiritual integrity to admit that it's scary, but we also need to be able to step outside of those boundaries and those constraints that make us want to stay safe. We don't like to look at certain things sometimes like death or afterlife or what it could mean for us. And sometimes we don't want to take responsibility for our ancestors and generational trauma that we have and things like that. So I would say that a lot of people are afraid because maybe unconsciously they're aware of all that work and play that has to be done to, progress and perhaps move forward and upward. So maybe that's it. I don't know. I'm sure that everyone would have a slightly different answer, but that's just on the surface level what I perceive. There's a lot to be done. And it's like that same feeling. I don't know if you play video games, but it's like when you go to this open world, it's beautiful and it's fun. But I hear from people all the time, there's so many choices to make. It frustrates me. I don't know which one to make. I don't know which quest to do. I don't know which thing. And that's part of the territory. And I think it translates directly into our human world where we just have to be confident with what we choose because, there's really innumerable options out there. I'm being very nebulous here, but
but it's so accurate too, right? When we're made to be presented with these, infinite possibilities and choices, it can be overwhelming for an individual. And yet, why is it's so challenging for what seems like most people to feel confident in a choice that they're making?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think that's also what we're doing is we deconstruct old ideas. It's like, how do we know whether we fully deconstructed until we mess up? It's okay to mess up sometimes. Like, I mean, there's some colossal mistakes that maybe we shouldn't make, but we're human. We have to be permissive to our own humanity and accept fully what we are because it's amazing. It's like part of the fun is messing up sometimes and being like, well, you know what? That didn't quite work out the way I thought it was, but it's okay. It's like, the old saying, now I know a ton of different ways not to make a light bulb because you messed up so many times, but it's okay. You found out all these other things. You carved out all these other delicious pieces of knowledge about yourself and really excavated your interior architecture and came to know it even better.
Absolutely. Do you feel like some of the, I guess, do you feel like there's some sort of, at least now, where, having conversations now that folks weren't having, 10, 20, 30 years ago about consciousness and just thinking about where we're at and where we're headed. Do you feel like some of that indoctrination that maybe has been there for maybe some time is starting to erode?
I think so. And since I'm in Sedona, I do have a front row seat to some of that. There
Mm,
is still a big split here. I don't ever want to present it as, oh, this is a perfect utopia. It's not. I mean, we have beautiful events and people and, interactions here. It's incredible. We have moments of utopia, but we're not quite there, as a continuum or an immersive experience 24/7 yet. So one of the biggest things that I've been seeing, granted, I'm about to be 30 in April, so I can only go back so far, since my spiritual awakening. But it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like initially there was this big push to just transcend.
mm,
Like, at least that's what I've seen. I'm just speaking from my personal sphere here. But there was always this push to transcend. And yes, you would deal with some things, but it's like anything human was yucky, or you couldn't do certain things or eat certain things or I don't know, read certain things, whatever it is. But something that I really want to ground now as a I don't know, we could call it a modality, even though that seems a bit reductive, but just as a lifestyle, I guess, is to become fully human, make full contact with our human selves first. Because it's like it's these little conversations and tidbits throughout Sedona that I hear like, oh, you're into Pokemon. Oh, well, that's lower dimensional. So, when you evolve, you won't be as into that or something like that. Or, oh, you like to read fantasy. I don't know. I mean, you could live it instead. It's like I can do both at the same time. But it's one of those things where I why did we incarnate if we're not going to experience the human aspects in our amazing creations? And can I say we created some really cool stuff? I love video
absolutely.
games and D&D and books, all these behind me. I love all of these great things. So I would just say that's probably the biggest thing I've noticed. It's transcendence has took on this connotation where it was about spiritual bypassing. But
Mm,
in spirituality, I think the only way up or out or however you want to think of it is through.
mhm.
So, but the thing is, I'm even making it sound maybe like it's like, oh, the only way out is through. And we usually mean that in a negative way. But for us, it's a good thing. It's like, it's not a bad experience. It's really cool here on Earth. There's so many delicious things to experience and create and, be a part of and collaborate on. So I think it's more inspirational than it is, you know, depressing or fear inducing, at least for me.
Right. No, that's great. I love that. And I think that's getting to that point, like how challenging was it for you to get to that point to where you're like, oh gosh, this is awesome. Life is delicious. There's so many awesome things, and we all have our own individual journey, our own path that we have to take. But um, I guess,
Yeah.
you know, when was that? What was that like?
Yeah, that's a really big question. And I love it because it's one of those things that is one of the biggest talking points, again, for me, because as I said earlier, came from a very conservative fundamentalist household, no offense intended toward anyone who has certain
No.
religious or spiritual proclivities. But what I mean by that is my parents were authoritarian. They were a family cult. They were very abusive. I have to come to terms with that. So what that meant was, even though I'm autistic, so I have many special interests. I was undiagnosed autistic at the time. I didn't know what it was that was going on inside of me. I had special interests, but at the same time, they were so narrowed and stifled. I didn't even have full internet access for a variety of, conservative inspired reasons. So I think coming out of that it was like letting a racehorse out of the gate. So I've noticed that some people do hang back because they're not sure what to do, but I just burst through that gate and I was just out of there and like exploring all these many, many different things. So for me, I think it was actually pretty easy in that regard. It was just, I just went for it. There were so many things I'd wanted to read and look up and explore and experience. And I came into contact with so many more things I didn't even know were out there. Because, you know, when your ceiling is about this high and your head's bumping it every step of the way, in every way, it's like, you know, how much of the world can you really know? So for me, it was just an exciting, fun journey. I'm not sure I have the best advice for someone who's nervous about coming out of it because I had the opposite experience. But it's a process of deconstruction in some ways, because no matter what, we do absorb things from childhood that we need to think about, process, let go of. But at the same time, it's also a really cool time of integration and accumulation, even at times, not to sound consumerist there, but I mean, we're humans. We have to consume some things to survive. So yeah, I mean, that probably wasn't as deep as you wanted it to be, but I came out of the gate running.
That's great. And do you feel like in that process, do you feel like looking back now, do you feel like, gosh, do you have any regrets as like how quickly you came out of the gate, or do you, feel like it was just all the way it was supposed to be?
I really do feel, and I did think about that before, I really do feel that it was the way it was supposed to be. I don't think I ever drifted into dangerous territory or toxic territory, even if I explored certain things or came to know certain things that weren't for me. So it's not like there's nothing wrong with going out and partying, but that's just not my personality. I didn't go out and do all this, wild child type stuff that you would normally associate with someone, finally finding their freedom. It wasn't quite like that for me. It was more like, I'm pretty boring, I guess, but my idea of having a good time was going to Barnes and Noble and actually just being able to read the actual science section because, that contradicts certain creationist ideologies, and things like that. They didn't want to expose us too much to that type of thing. So it was more like that, and just going out and finding a lot of geeky interests. A lot of people don't know, but I am part of the goth community, which is just a music-based subculture. It's not automatically attached to, any spiritual or religion or political identity, even though goth can be political. That's a whole different conversation, but that's a whole other conversation. But I really got to explore the music I liked and things like that. And it's one of those things where it's like, I didn't think I would say this, but it feels so good to be human. And it's nice to kind of relax into that. And it's just like when your nervous system is finally able to regulate after such an extended time of stress and, high cortisol and just saturation in that type of field, it's just like letting your breath out, letting your hair down, breathing out and fully relaxing and releasing and allowing a symbiotic exchange with your environment, which before was much more, orthorexic, for lack of a better word. It's like you could only take in very small or narrow things. So it feels good to me.
That's awesome. I think that's great. And I can align with that in the sense of like, I suffer from anxiety and some obsessive compulsive disorder. So for me, it's taken me on a journey to get comfortable with certain things and just having that ease and not being that constant fight, flight, or freeze, mentality. So what are some things that, you do regularly to maybe keep yourself feeling human and feeling good about life?
Yeah, I love that question. You just asked an autistic person about their special interests. So yeah, that's
awesome.
great. Let's see. So I already talked about how I'm part of the goth community, and that's widely misunderstood. I won't dive into all that now, but I do have some articles about it on my website, geekgirlunderworld.com. I'm about to post another one. So there's that. I really love playing Dungeons and Dragons. I have DM'd a little bit. You know what I'm talking about. I think that's such a cool way to explore alternate versions of the self. Like, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. Well, I growing up, I played a lot of D&D and advanced Dungeons and Dragons as well too.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I made so many friends. It was probably some of the best times of my life. Just like hanging out, take turns at whose friend's house we were going to, who was going to be the DM. And it was just like, you're right. It's the best way to, I guess, experiment and try these different avenues of self. It really just like, oh gosh, like I have this option to do X, Y, or Z. Well, I'm going to do this, let's see what happens, and have that fun. And it's just like almost meta in a sense where it's like, it's just so cool.
It is, isn't it? I love that. I felt like you would really understand that. So that's so neat. So D&D, I love to read, obviously, if you look behind me. I read about 200 to 300 books a year. So that does include comics and manga. So they're not all, massive, massive novels. A lot of them are, but not all of them. I got my partner addicted to Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive series for anyone who's interested. Good series. Let's see. I like mermaiding, of course. That's where you actually like wear a silicone mermaid tail and you go swim in the water with it. Those are pretty fun. Yeah. So that's fun. I'm trying to think. I don't know. I always blank out when people ask me stuff because I got like my big 3 things, but I don't know. It's just geeking, nerding. I love to obviously be in nature. Of course, that is a part of it as well. And I live in such a gorgeous space where I can walk out my door and just walk like into a canyon and just fully connect and immerse in something that many people have to travel to see. So I'm aware of how privileged I am in that. That's absolutely incredible. But yeah, those are the big things like reading, nerding, booking out. And actually, it made me think when you said how we need to get out of like fight or flight, freeze or faint, I don't, like we talked about earlier, I don't like to hypergender things. However, there are certain proclivities that come with one's biological sex. And this is just one study. And I think, as we know, one study in and of itself isn't enough to really, land on a firm point. But there was one study I was reading where biological women have a tendency to tend and befriend. So I was thinking, well, what's a great space where, certain people who want to tend to befriend and other people who need to get out of that fight or flight can kind of process those things. And it's so simple. It's gaming. If you think about it, because there's this huge market now for casual gaming and cozy gaming. I have a blog post about those games too on my Nintendo Switch, where we can facilitate those interactions, whatever they look like, kind of live through them in this alternate, virtual world. And I understand that there are some spiritual, warnings with that, like don't get too far into it, be able to come back into your body. But I think it's a great way to explore those things and to kind of neuroregulate and find out where your homeostatic baseline is and get back to it. And it doesn't always have to be meditation, even though that's really fun. It doesn't always have to be channeling. Sometimes we can just use the beautiful things that humans create and allow ourselves to be cool enough to play with them, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's such a great avenue to think about. Like, anytime we're focused fully into doing anything, it's in its of itself, it's a form of meditation because we literally are focused on this thing and everything's there. We're not thinking about past. We're not thinking about future. It's just right there in that present moment in time.
That's the golden age, isn't it? It's like when we're so immersed in what we're doing, we don't want to be anywhere else. That's the best feeling. Like when you just fully absorb into what you love and then you come up and you're just like, wow, I could live there. I could stay here. This is great. That's such a good feeling. I love the way you said that.
Thank you. So where can folks find you on the internet?
Yeah. So if they want the spiritual mermaidy side, also keep in mind, I do talk about some hot topics in Sedona. I do address some of those, social challenges. But if you want all that mermaidy goodness, then you can go to thesedonamermaid.com. So that's that. And then, like I said, I also do have a geeky blog. These are both pretty new, especially the geek one. It's only been up for a few months, but it's called geekgirlunderworld.com. And I've been kind of thinking to myself, you know what, maybe I should have just made this into a goth website because half the articles I'm writing are about that subculture and its meanings and how it does interface with spirituality and gender and all those, big topics. But for now, it's a well-rounded, starting to be well-rounded, at least approach to just geekery and the things I like. And it's simple and not intended to be super professional or anything. It's just kind of like a fun space for me to talk about the things that I like. So those are the 2 best places to find me.
That's awesome. And are you on any social media? Could people find you on like Instagram or Twitter or anything like that?
They could find me on Instagram. they can look me up by my name, Swann, or the Velveteen Victorian. But the thing is, I don't use it that much. So, I mean, you can follow me on there occasionally. I'll post a picture of something, but I don't really use it. I don't know. I'm not too big on social media. I have a Tumblr, but it's more oriented toward like uh, the darker, like gothic academic stuff, but also the Velveteen Victorian. So they can check that out if they really want to. But yeah, the big spiritual one is just my website. That's why I created it, because I realized that on some of these other platforms, they're great, they're beautiful, but they didn't provide the freedom, even if it was just about blog length, like how many words I could say. They didn't give me the large perimeter I really needed to fully explore myself. So I just created the whole website just for that.
Oh, that's great. And you talked about possibly even writing the next book. So what could we expect? Or maybe, I mean, are you thinking like a time frame at all?
I haven't thought of a specific time frame, honestly. It would be cool to have it done in the next year or so, but we know how these things go. And as I said, I usually just tend to sit down and info dump when the time is, you go, when the time is right. I do have another book that's almost fully formed. I'm missing a few chapters and it needs a lot of refining, but it is spiritual in a way, but it's more about coming out of the dogmatic religious environment that I was in. Not shaming one's religious or mystical interests, but getting away from that fundamentalist controlling, aspect to that. And so the first part is like my personal story. And then the second part is deconstructing ways that the New Age, I feel, has appropriated some of those fundamentalist modalities. In a way, there's kind of that vein right now, especially in Sedona for that. But then I end each chapter with talking about all the things that we are doing well and how we can move forward. So I have one on like gender identity. I have one on sacred sexuality. I have one on even just how marriage was, a big control point for like social reproduction and things like that, and religiosity, but how we're also sometimes trying to solve problems incorrectly through that venue, and spirituality as well. So it goes into all these things, but hopefully I can have that done pretty soon. It's just, that one was a bit more of a process, but it's a bigger book by many means.
And where can folks find the book that you do have out now? Where is that available?
Yeah, so my publisher was Inner Traditions. I actually have the book right here. I don't know if you can see it. It's what it looks like. So it's called How to Become a Mermaid, Embodying the Elemental Energy of Water. And my name on it is actually Elyrria Swann. Elyrria is my middle name. So that's how they can find it. It's through, I believe Barnes & Noble has it. You can buy it on Inner Traditions website. There's a lot of really great books on there too. So if you want to browse and go treat yourself a bit, there's many wonderful authors other than just me. And then I believe that Amazon has it as well. I know a lot of people don't like to support Amazon, but for some people, that's all that they can access easily. So you can go there as well.
Awesome. Well, I can't thank you enough for your time, your energy, your spirit, and just thank you for talking with me today. I really, really sincerely appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you so much. It was a beautiful exchange. It was free flowing, and you facilitate the water energy just in a stunning way. This was so nice.
And there you have it. I absolutely and thoroughly enjoyed that conversation with Elle. You can find Elyrria's book, How to Become a Mermaid, Embodying the Elemental Energy of Water, through innertraditions.com. You can find Elle on the internet at thesedonamermaid.com, as well as geekgirlunderworld.com. If you enjoyed it, please take a moment and share it with someone who would enjoy this content, and rate it. We're still a small podcast, and by you rating it, you are helping us tremendously. If you're watching this episode, we hope you're subscribed to the channel. Take a moment and hit that like button and hit that notification bell so you can find out about future episodes when they come out. Thank you all so much for joining us on this journey. And until next time, take care of one another and keep thinking for yourself.